Om Tyageshwaram Ramakrishnam Sharadam Matra Rupinim Vivekananda Mahacharyam Natva Vakshyami Shuddhaya. In our last class we discussed a sutra which describes the characteristics of a parabhakta. There are three sutras which will describe the characteristics of a parabhakta. These sutras are important because these also give us an idea as to what is parabhakti. When we study these characteristics of a parabhakta, we also get more clear idea of what parabhakti is. That sutra was Yallabdva Puman Siddho Bhavati Amrito Bhavati Tripto Bhavati. That was the sutra. The word Labdva gave an idea that it is receiving. It is God's grace which is an important factor in this receiving of parabhakti. Human effort does have a place. Next sutra will tell that. But this sutra refers to receiving this parabhakti, labha, which comes through grace of God. The second word was puman, that is human being. Now see, in this creation there are so many bodies, so many births. We have human birth. There are subhuman births like animals, plants, trees, and there are superhuman births like gods, angels, and yaksha, gandharva, kinnara, all that. Amongst all these, this human birth, it is only in human birth that conditions are most favorable for attaining this parabhakti. So he uses the word puman. We have got this, so we should make utmost of this human birth to achieve this parabhakti. Then the third word was Siddho Bhavati. A person who receives this parabhakti, he or she becomes Siddha, perfect. Perfect in his or her love for God. That love reaches its perfection. No more addition or subtraction is possible, it is limitless. And this word Siddha has nothing to do with siddhis or miraculous powers. A person who has these siddhis or miraculous powers is also called a siddha. But here that is not the reference. On the contrary, these siddhis, miraculous powers, are a great obstacle in the spiritual journey. These are not an indications of spiritual excellence of the person who holds them. These are never to be treated as indicators of spiritual excellence, spiritual eminence of the person who displays these miraculous powers. That is not the case. These are actually obstructions. Anyway, so such a person becomes perfect in his or her divine love. Perfect means it is limitless love. Then it says such a person becomes amrita, immortal. Receiving this bhakti, which in earlier sutra was characterized as amrita swarupa, of the intrinsic nature of amrita. And receiving this bhakti, person who receives that devotee, he or she becomes amrita, becomes immortal. So receiving immortal bhakti, immortal love, we become immortal. When we put these two things together, we understand that this supreme love, which is immortal, is our own real nature. And that is why when we receive it, we become immortal. Brahmaveda Brahmaiva Bhavati. One who knows Brahman becomes Brahman. Knowing a chair, I don't become chair. But knowing Brahman, one becomes Brahman. Why? Because the Brahman is known as one's own self. So when we know an entity as our own self, then we become that entity. So also, when we receive this parabhakti, we receive it as our own self. That also will be explained in the next one or sutras. So this parabhakti or supreme love is our own real nature. And hence, receiving it, we become immortal. The devotee becomes immortal. That's how these characteristics give us the idea of what bhakti is. This bhakti is supreme love, is our own real nature. Hence we receive it, we become one with it, and we also become immortal. The bhakta becomes immortal. Amrito bhavati. And then tripto bhavati, satisfied. He or she becomes perfectly satisfied. Now we also have satisfaction in our life, but it is in certain areas, and that too for a certain period of time. We do experience satisfaction. But in case of this parabhakta, it is in all areas and for all time to come. So he is perfectly satisfied, so to say. Unlike ours, this satisfaction of the parabhakta is in all areas for all time to come. Actually, it means that person becomes desireless. It is only desires which lead to dissatisfaction. And when a person becomes completely desireless, that person becomes completely satisfied. So that was the first. So the first of the three sutras which describe the characteristics of a parabhakta. The second sutra which describes these characteristics, it says yat prapya na kinchit vanchati na dveshti na shochati na ramate na utsahi bhavati. That is the sutra, a bit long one. So here again yat refers to parabhakti. The word used next is prapya. In the earlier sutra it was labdva, having received. Here it says having attained, yat prapya. This is where the hint is towards necessity of human effort in receiving this parabhakti. This attainment indicates human effort. So human effort is very much necessary, but not sufficient, no doubt, but it is necessary. When we have exhausted ourselves, it is then that the grace of God comes, and that grace of God will result, or that will bring parabhakti in our heart. But human effort is absolutely necessary. So that human effort is hinted at by this word prapya, yat prapya. And then there are 5 characteristics mentioned. Na kinchit vanchati, that is, doesn't desire anything. Na shochati, doesn't grieve. Na dveshti, doesn't hate. Na ramate, doesn't get elated. And no utsahi bhavati, doesn't enthusiastically exert to achieve something. So this is different from what was told earlier. The earlier ones were kind of in positive terms. Trupto bhavati, amrito bhavati. This is negative terms. All na. Second difference is earlier one was more like subjective. Man is trupta, amrita, we may not really know. But these are the signs which we can know from outside. He doesn't hate anyone, doesn't grieve, doesn't get elated. So these are the signs which you can say objective. We can be observed. These can be observed by a second person. Such kind of signs are given here. Now these are all related, and how they are related we'll see. These are all related. The first one is na kinchit vanchati, that is, he or she doesn't desire anything. This desire comes in our heart as a result, actually. As a result, first we have identification with this limited body mind. We think I am this. This leads to a sense of imperfection. I lack this. That imperfection leads to desire, I want this. So first is I am this limited apparatus, I lack this, and then I want this. That's how desire comes. Then I see something outside myself which will complete me, which will remove that imperfection. So these are the two things which happen. But when you compare this to a Parabhakta, he or she has transcended this identification with limited apparatus, with individualized body mind that is shed, that is discarded. He has become one with that love, which is limitless. So there is no sense of imperfection in Parabhakta. Since there is no sense of imperfection, there is no desire. Secondly, Parabhakta also won't see anything distinct from himself outside. Because Parabhakta has become one with the love, which is the self of all. So there is nothing distinct from his or herself which he or she would seek. And there is no sense of imperfection. So there is no vancha, there is no desire in the heart of a Parabhakta. That is the first, na vanchati. Then na shochati, the shoka, grief. Why do we grieve? What is grief? They say grief is a kind of pain of heart, pain of the mind. When we lose something that we cherish, or when we get something that is undesirable. I get something that is undesirable and that leads me to grief. Or I lose something that I cherish, that I love so much, and I lose it. Then again I grieve. Now what has Parabhakta got? Parabhakta has got that supreme love, and he is one with it. There is no way Parabhakta is going to lose that love. He has become one with it. Tripto bhavati, amruto bhavati. He has become immortal, he has become one with that love. There is no way he can lose it. So this grief, which is a result of losing something that we cherish, it has no scope. And we say something undesirable coming to the Parabhakta, there is also no scope. Because for him, everything is happening by the will of God. Parabhakta experiences. He doesn't think, he experiences that everything is happening by the will of God. Swami says, Pavahari Baba, when a snake bit, he said, a messenger came from my beloved. A messenger came from my beloved, Pavahari Baba says. So for Parabhakta, everything is happening by will of God. There is no undesirable event happening in his or her life which will lead him or her to grief. In our life, you see these things keep coming. Pleasure and pain. They say pleasure and pain, they are related. Pain, they say, is either the root or the fruit of pleasure. So pleasure is in between. Either pleasure comes after a lot of pain, where pain becomes the root, or pain comes after pleasure, where pain becomes the fruit of pleasure. They are related. But the Supreme Bhakta, he cannot lose what he has. And there is no event, no circumstance which is undesirable to him or her. Because everything is happening by will of God. So there is no scope for this shoka, for grief. Third one is nadveshti. Why we hate someone, get angry at someone. When that event, that person, that object, it stands between us and the object of our desire. When an event, a person or an object stands between us and the object of our desire, we hate that person. But when it comes to Parabhakti, there is nothing that can stand between that Parabhakta and the love, because he has become one with it. Parabhakta has become one with love. There is nothing that can stand, there is nothing can separate Parabhakta from that love. There is no scope for dvesha, for hatred. And then na ramate, there is no elation. When do we get elated? When we get angry at someone, when that event, that person or an object stands between us and the object of our desire, we hate that person. But when it comes to Parabhakti, there is nothing that can stand, there is nothing can separate Parabhakta from that love. There is no scope for dvesha, for hatred. And then na ramate, there is no elation. I want something, I struggle for it, I get it. When I get it, I'm elated. I become happy. And Parabhakta, he has got everything that he or she desires. Most precious achievement he or she has got. There is nothing in the world that he or she craves. So there is no elation at getting anything. Like for a king, give something petty, it doesn't make any difference. It's nothing for him. Even the pada, the post of Brahma, Hiranyagarbha, is nothing for a devotee who has discovered, received this treasure of divine love in his or her heart. There is nothing more precious than that. So there is no elation. And for the same reason, there is no enthusiastic exertion, utsaha. When I want something or when I hate someone, I enthusiastically exert myself to get rid of undesirable entities or to get something that I want. The exertion comes. For a parabhakta, there is no need for exertion. He is tripta, he is satisfied. So these are all related, you see. When there is desire, then there is utsaha, then there is exertion. If something comes in the achievement of the desired object, there is hatred. If I don't get desired object, there is grief. If I get desired object, there is elation. So all these things are there. But in Parabhakta, he has no worldly desires. Hence, in a worldly sense, these are not possible. And what he has achieved, he has become one with it. It can never be lost. It can never be augmented. It can never be reduced. It's perfect, limitless. So all these are not possible in a Parabhakta. For us, yes, we should strive. We should strive to control, to keep our desires in check. Our hatred, our angers, we should strive. But when it comes to Parabhakta, there is a difference. See, a seeker has to strive for all this. Navanchati, naramate, nadveshti. He has to strive to not to grieve, to not to hate. But in case of Parabhakta, he or she doesn't have to strive. These are natural to him or her. They just flow. This absence of hatred, absence of desires, these are natural to a Parabhakta. He or she doesn't have to strive for these. Second point is, from our understanding, we may think that what is the point in living such a life? There's no desires, no elation, no exertion, no enthusiasm, no hatred. What's the point in leading such a life? It is a dead life, an inert life, or a heartless life. But that is not the case. So we have to understand this. All these, especially absence of desires and absence of hatred and absence of exertion, enthusiastic exertion and all that, absence of elation, these are all, when we talk of these being absent in a Parabhakta, we have to understand these, that in the context of his own self-centered desires and self-centered interests, these are absent. There is no desire, no hatred, no elation, no exertion so far as his or her self-centered desires and interests are concerned. But it doesn't mean that person is an inert or a heartless person. That doesn't mean that person doesn't see misery in the world, doesn't see imperfection in the world. That person does see misery in the world, does see imperfection in the world. When he or she sees it, he or she feels grief. So a Paramabhakta will have shoka. Then he or she will have desire to remove that suffering of others. So he or she will have vancha, desire. He or she will exert utsaha, will be there to remove the suffering of others. He or she will be elated in the happiness of others. But all this is for others. For his or her own self, there is only tripti. There is oneness with love. So it's not that it's an inert life or a heartless being. No. Extremely sensitive, compassionate, highly enthusiastic person is a Parabhakta. We may not be moved by the sufferings of all, but the Parabhakta is definitely moved by sufferings of others. The amount of work we can do is always checked by our self-interests. But the amount of work that a Parabhakta can do, it's limitless. He can exert himself beyond human levels to remove the sufferings of others. So when you say a Parabhakta has no desires, no enthusiasm and all that, it is all in the context of his or her personal self-centered desires. But when it comes to others, he or she does grieve for the suffering of others, does have a desire to remove that suffering, does elate in the happiness of others, does exert himself or herself to remove the suffering of others. So all these things are there in a Parabhakta. So we shouldn't think that Parabhakta is an inert, heartless person. No. When it comes to his or her personal desires, personal wants, self-centered interests, there he or she is fully satisfied. No desires, and as such, no other offsprings of these desires. See, all these are offsprings of desires, so to say. Dvesha and then Ramana and Utsaha, all these are offsprings of desire. So these are absent in the individual personal context in a Parabhakta. The state of Parabhakta is state of Jivan Mukta. We have to understand. It is a state of Jivan Mukti. And this state of Jivan Mukta has been an enigma. Because we try to understand it with our own reasons and logics. But it fails. The simple logic that we use is, for a body mind to work, there has to be an entity which will own it. I think this is me, this is my body. Since I work with this body, this is my mind, or I am this mind. When the mind is unhappy, I feel I am unhappy. So we are used to this entity, this jiva, which owns this limited individualized apparatus and then works. A Parabhakta has transcended this. He or she has no identification with this limited apparatus of body and mind. But in spite of that, there is activity seen in Parabhakta. How is that possible? That is the enigma. Without someone owning that particular body and mind, how are actions possible in that body and mind? That becomes the question. And we will see next class. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.